Hello, everyone. Welcome to A Good Night for a Murder, a Victorian true crime podcast. My name is Kim, and this is a special Thanksgiving bonus episode. Just a little something to say thank you to all of you, my wonderful listeners. Whether you've been listening for a while or just discovered the podcast, I want you to know that I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for being here. So here on this Thanksgiving Eve, if you're cooking or cleaning or traveling, or maybe you're just keeping to yourself and preserving your own peace, I wanted to release a little something to keep you company and show my gratitude for all of you. I invited a guest onto the podcast to talk about something I find super interesting, which is cemeteries and gravestone conservation. It's just kind of a thing that comes up when you talk about and think about historical true crime a lot. We talked about what a grave conservator does, how to get into the line of work, things you should and should not do as an aspiring grave conservator, views on cemeteries and mourning then and now, mourning traditions we think should come back, has she ever encountered anything spooky, and bonus stones. This is my conversation with Rachel from Epoch Preservation. A Good Night for a Murder is a true crime podcast that does cover stories including death, violence, sexual assault, and other adult themes. Please take care while listening. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks for having me.
Your business is called Epoch Preservation, or do you say Epoch?
It is Epic. I like that it kind of sounds like the word epic. Like EPIC, I kind of like how that sounds. But you could say it any way you want, and I would never be offended. I actually ran into someone at a farmer's market yesterday who was like, "Have you heard of Epoch Preservation?" Because I was talking about gravestones with someone. I'm like, "Yes, I own it," and I just didn't. I don't even bother.
No, well, I want to say it the way you say it. So, Epoch Preservation.
We say it epic, but it's always been a bit of an inside joke that we like to confuse people with.
Yeah, no, it's fun. So do you want to start off by explaining what it is you do?
So I am a gravestone conservator, which is a person who stabilizes gravestones and their fragments in a way that keeps them upright and safe until the next generation of conservators can come in and continue to, take care of the gravestone. We don't refurbish gravestones. We don't recarve gravestones. We don't do anything to a gravestone, with probably one or two exceptions that isn't reversible or anything like that. We want our work to be easily reversible. We try to, like when you think of art conservation in a museum, we try not to make our hand on the gravestone particularly obvious or more important than the artist's hand. So we're really stabilizing the work and keeping things upright is really what our job is. And it's hard to do when an object is outside, but
yes,
that's our goal.
That's such important work. And so you're in the Massachusetts area. Do you primarily stick to Massachusetts or all over New England?
Yeah, so we are usually between Rhode Island and Southern New Hampshire, but we're happy to travel. Josh likes to travel. I'm a little bit more of a homebody. We sort of have the business separated in two, where he does all the away jobs and I take charge of all the close by jobs. So, yeah, but the reason why we started this business had to do with the condition of the gravestones in our area. So we wanted to improve their condition in our own backyard so that we were passing by them every day and seeing our efforts as we strolled them ourselves. So I like to stay personally as local as I can stay, so I can check up on things and make sure everything's going okay.
Yeah, in your own community, that's important work. Like you said, the elements will come along and all sorts of things can happen. So it's nice to be kind of a conservator and someone watching over that for those people who can. So I think that's really lovely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's hard to keep up a little bit with the changing climate. Sometimes it's hard now to make decisions on how to repair something based on what the climate even was a year or two ago. Like, it's changing so minutely. but that was like minute changes change everything. So the elements are
Interesting.
always going to work on them, but it's hard for us to be like, oh, this is a strange year. And this is the
So
year where it's going to be very windy or
very
very,
weird. So how long have you been doing this actually?
for 10 years.
For 10 years. That's amazing. And so you said you just kind of started it because you saw a need for it in your community. Did you have any sort of like training in like masonry or anything like that?
Yeah, neither Josh or I came at it from like no experience. I was a museum administrator before, so I had a lot of
Oh,
object
wow.
handling and a bit of object conservation knowledge,
Mhm.
not as an object conservator, but Josh had organic landscaping. He did a lot of masonry himself
Mm.
before, and it was really just a byproduct of chance. I was writing a book, and the last chapter was in a burying ground, and I Googled where it would be. And I was like, let's go and let's get some inspo. I was so close to finishing, and we wandered upon the most like egregious thing I've ever seen, where you couldn't even walk in, and it was full of
Oh, how awful.
needles, and to the point where some of the gravestones, the newer ones, were being used by partiers as like fire pits. They
Oh,
were,
how
you know,
awful.
and so broken from the fire, the expansion of the heat. And so some of these gravestones, there was a 1644 burying ground, which is the oldest in Gloucester currently. And the one behind it was a Victorian era cemetery. It was very little, but you couldn't even see it when we first got there. And so we
Wow.
were getting a lot of calls when we got started, and we were just volunteers. This was something that it lit a flame in me, and I just fought for, years to save it. But we were getting phone calls from like relatively new, descendants saying, my grandmother's there. This is the first time I'm able to visit her grave. And
Wow.
you would take for granted that somebody within a couple generations would be in a cemetery where you'd be able to visit them, but it was not like that at all. So,
Wow, that's pretty
yeah.
amazing. And so this has become like your full-time gig.
Yeah. So about
Oh,
7 years ago, we turned it into a business.
that's amazing. So I also saw on your website a mention of the Secretary of Interior Standards for Historical Preservation. That
Yeah.
sounds very official.
It is very official.
Yeah. Is that
You go
something that you
online.
achieved and applied for? You have to take a
It's
test?
something that anybody in historic preservation, whether it is somebody working in old burying grounds, restoring old houses, just any historic site needs to adhere to. And so
Mhm.
it's a set of standards. Basically, when you have something that's broken, you want to replace it, you're replacing it with like materials,
Mm.
you're trying not to disturb the historic landscape by like introducing something that doesn't belong there.
Mhm.
So the historic preservation standards are a little bit general. Conservators have their own standards about like do no harm practices, don't take on repairs you don't already know how to do, stuff like that. But in this field, it's so unregulated that you're often finding people who don't adhere to those standards. So I would just say if somebody's looking to hire a conservator or a repair person or whatever, that they're hearing phrases like we adhere to the Secretary of the Interior standard,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
some people are going out doing really wild things to gravestones that ultimately are going to lead to their destruction.
Is that specifically for places that are on like is it the historical registry
No,
that it
I
only
mean,
applies, or it's like everywhere? I mean, because I know if it's a churchyard, it has a church. If it's a graveyard, it's not a church. If it's a burying ground, it's neither or it's both.
yeah. So a burying ground was basically just a field. You're right. A churchyard had a church.
Right.
That's also called a graveyard,
And the
which I
cemetery is
would
kind
think
of like a,
I even debate with myself, what's a graveyard? Does a graveyard just mean there was a church, or could a graveyard be a little burying place in front of a hospital? Could it
oh,
be,
right,
because there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like smallpox burying places that were
for sure.
part of, asylums had their own burying places. Do we call those graveyards? Or do we call them burial grounds?
Then there's
You
the
know,
cemeteries as well. Those
cemeteries
are
just means that it was
public.
landscaped.
Oh,
It
interesting.
was
That's
it
all that
was meant,
means.
Yeah, really. It just like curbings, maybe roads, trees were put there on purpose.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
you're hired to work in like all of the above.
Yeah, all of the above. We
Amazing.
have a preference for the very, very old gravestones, like the old slate
Right.
and old
hmm
marble, but we do occasionally do some newer stuff, just not too often. That's more for monument companies,
I
the
see.
brand new
So
stuff.
mausoleums and that sort of thing are not so
We
much
do
your
a little
jam.
tomb work, but it has to be sort of small. Like we're
hmm
working on a broken door at Harmony Grove in
Hmm.
Salem. We've done a few doors to tombs, but not like we don't have cranes and we're
Yeah.
more gravestone conservators, so just
Yeah. And you
smaller.
said that you're like a duo. Do you have like helpers that like go out with you into the cemetery?
Yeah,
Um,
so I have my business partner Josh, and then we have a couple of employees that help us do sort of like the easier stuff so that we can focus on the harder stuff.
mhm, mhm.
So it's a small team and they come and go. A lot of our team are art students,
Art
people.
students. That's interesting.
Yeah, we have a local art college where you have to do an internship. So a lot of
Oh, what a great
you know,
opportunity.
yeah, so some of our people started as interns because they needed an internship to graduate, and then we'd
hmm
be like, well, you're like the only people who know what's going on, so we'll just hire you or
hmm
so we have some like part-time
Yeah. Cool.
art kids.
And you said that being from New England, there's some really old cemeteries, graveyards, burying grounds in that area, right? Like going back to what's the oldest that you think you've worked in?
The oldest burying ground,
hmm
probably. There are several that are the same age. That's why I'm going back
Oh,
and forth on
interesting.
it. Because people always think, oh, there's going to be an oldest something. And you're like, actually, a lot of the state was all founded at once. So Dorchester, I think, dates to 1632. So does Newbury. So does, so just a
hmm
general date, just the early 1630s are the oldest ones that we work in.
Wow, that's very cool. Um,
Yeah.
and so I guess like what kind of materials did they have now? Now we're used to seeing, what do we use now? Marble, granite mostly, but back then did they have like some alternate materials that you work mostly with?
Yeah. So back then, and this varies where you live, of course. Say you lived
hmm
in Connecticut, you would have like a lot of sandstone, and we have very little of that here, thank goodness, because it didn't stand up well. But so back then it would have been slate,
hmm
schist, fieldstone would have been the first they would have used.
hmm
So just stone they just found in the ground and just
Mm,
carved very crudely,
yeah.
just as charming as the ornate ones. Marble, some limestone.
hmm
Those are the basics. And so it's just very occasionally sandstone, but they have conservation issues. So who knows how frequently they use sandstone and maybe it just didn't survive.
Yeah, yeah, sandstone, like even I know that that's very brittle, right?
Yeah, anything that's porous is going to be more brittle because you have
hmm
all kinds of things getting into the pores and breaking it apart, as opposed to, sometimes you'll see a photo of a slate stone and you're like, that could have been carved yesterday. That's
Yeah.
because it's not porous. There's nothing getting in there destroying it. So
Interesting. So, what would be kind of like a typical job for you? So maybe you get a call, they're saying, is it typically like relatives who reach out to you, or do you do entire cemeteries or burying grounds?
it really depends on the funding that's available. So it's
Mm-hmm.
usually municipalities.
Mm-hmm.
We're usually bidding on work as contractors.
Interesting. Okay.
It is very occasionally families. I mean, I love working with families. We don't do it very often. Most of the time, with a few exceptions, if I've worked with a family, it's been because they were going to have a funeral
Mm,
and they came from out of state and realized that the plot was in shambles.
mm.
So if it's local and there's a family who has a funeral, I'm always happy to go out and try to make their place look nice. But
Yeah.
usually we're restoring entire burying grounds,
hmm
if not all at once, then in stages throughout years. So
Interesting. So yeah,
yeah,
so some of your work can span years that you're like going back to the same
yeah,
place.
yeah. We have a bunch of clients, and each of them are different. So say in Ipswich, where we live, we've been working on the same burying ground for 7 years.
hmm
And, say Peabody, we had one site that took us 2 years, another site that took us 1 year. They own a lot of burying places. So it can really depend. It's a lot of juggling in our heads of, you know,
Yeah. So would
sometimes
you,
you get emergency situations where
oh, what's like
a
a like
tree
gravestone
takes
restoration
something out.
emergency? Oh, okay.
Yeah, usually like a tree in a winter storm, like in
Yeah.
Raleigh, a couple of trees came down this winter and took out like 20 gravestones. So we
Mm,
try to prioritize getting out there and,
yeah.
you know,
Doing what you can to keep all the pieces together. And then would you normally go, you would go down there and you would visit like all the gravestones and you would say like, this is our plan. And then you just kind of chip away, so to speak.
we're going to be hired to do it, or somebody else will be hired to make a gravestone assessment.
Hmm.
And those assessments can be very little or very big. If it's like a very small thing, like we have 20 gravestones, can you repair them? We rarely charge to assess those.
Hmm.
But oftentimes these gravestone assessments are like required by Mass Historical, and they're the entire place. So sometimes we're hired to make those gravestone assessments. We try to do them in the winter when we're not doing physical labor, and just go stone by stone by stone. And then we go into the library and accumulate everything that's ever been written about that burying ground and write a history and
Wow,
all of
sounds
that. Sometimes
fascinating.
we're working from someone else's assessment. Sometimes this person who assesses the stone is not the same person who repairs them. So that's
Interesting.
fun because you don't always agree with how to repair something.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Interesting. I kind of assumed that like work would pause for you in the winter, but no, you're very busy all year round, it sounds like.
Yeah, with like bureaucratic stuff.
Right. I visit a lot of cemeteries, but a lot of them in my area, they kind of date to like the Victorian era, sometimes the 1700s and that sort of thing. I know that in the Victorian era, I think the zinc headstones got very popular.
They were never like used a ton. Sometimes you see these giant zinc monuments that are like 100 feet tall. Oh, they seem 100 feet tall.
Yeah.
There's one in Salem that pretty much reaches to the sky. It's a Union soldier cemetery area, and it is
Hmm.
just the largest zinky I've ever seen. But the difference really between our cemeteries and something, that you would see more in like Ohio, out
Yeah.
there where it wasn't settled, is really just the attitude around the cemeteries and
Hmm.
around burial and around, how we mourned people, how we saw death. Early burials here, there's a lot of reminders on gravestones that God has a plan. God
Hmm.
had a plan for your loved one. Like there's just a lot of etched reminders that, don't, become attached to things that aren't yours, they're God's type
Hmm.
of language.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, that's a lot of the earlier attitude is none of these people belong to each other.
Hmm.
You could have children, they're definitely your children, and of course you're going to feel for them, but ultimately they belong to to the God that they believed so strongly in at the time. And it was like one of their ways of coping,
Hmm.
was this sort of, it was like a grimmer
Yes,
time.
I've noticed that as well, and I've read about that a little bit, where like a lot of the, 1600 gravestones and everything would have like all the skulls and kind of everything that we think is like really macabre and creepy. That was actually meant to be kind of a reminder that like these are only your bones. The rest of you has ascended. And then in the Victorian era, they kind of got away from that symbolism. And I think the sentiment was mostly the same. You can let me know if you agree or disagree, but the symbolism was a little bit more uplifting. It's like the hands that are pointing upward. That's like they're up there now.
I've
um,
seen a few couch pointing downwards,
I've never
and you're
seen
like,
a
I don't think
pointed
that
down
that's what
one
they
yet.
meant.
No, I'm like, oh no.
I think there's some leeway in the symbolism.
Yeah, yeah, I know it's open. It can be open to interpretation a lot.
They were definitely
Um,
a lot more Calvinistic in Puritan America, a lot more, only so many people are going to ascend to heaven, only so many. You don't know who you
mm,
are. And those
okay.
are going to be the chosen ones. They're going to be the most successful people. There's just a lot of just belief around do good.
you take, it sounds like a much more like structured approach, just based on like your hiring and like bidding process and everything like that. But do you ever have trouble finding the graves that you need to work on? Because that's,
We have trouble not finding graves that we're not supposed to work on.
oh no.
Every time we repair a grave, there's a gravestone under the ground that we weren't expecting.
Oh, but where did it come from?
It usually they break and they sink, or people bury them on purpose, or
Hmm.
just a whole host of reasons. A lot of burial on purpose going on with, like, do you know how like have a grave will have a headstone and will have a little footstone that goes with it?
Hmm.
So sometimes people took the footstone out and would just like bury it under the ground, holding up different gravestones, sort of like as a fill. And we're just finding stuff all the time. Sometimes things just break and the dirt accumulates over the years and they get lost. And
Yeah.
but it's constant. Like
Yeah.
there's never a job where we don't find something that we have to do something about, and we morally can't just shove it back in the ground and pretend we didn't see it. So it often makes our work like 3 times the
Hmm.
amount that we were expecting.
Yeah.
Call them bonus stones.
Bonus stones.
And there are always bonus stones. And then we feel bad if we don't find a missing gravestone. So then we'll just like do another gravestone as our bonus stone. Like
Oh,
maybe
wow.
something that caught our eye that feels very sentimental to us. We'll be like,
Hmm.
okay, we'll add that to the job as our bonus stone or our,
Oh, I love that. Thank you for doing
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I, often wonder why cemeteries are not mapped out better. I feel like everyone has this problem when you go into a cemetery
Because
looking for
there's
something
so much
specific.
change.
Hmm.
So few of them are actually laid out the way they were originally laid out for a variety of
Hmm.
reasons.
Interesting. What do you think when you see people doing this work kind of independently? Like it's kind of become a thing on social media where there's just folks who are like, this is my hobby. I go out and I clean gravestones. Is that a good thing or is that
Well, I
not
mean,
a good thing?
what choice do people have? I mean, there isn't a
Hmm.
lot of training around the country. People only have so many resources.
Hmm.
Not everybody can afford the things that we were able to swing to learn how to do things, right?
Hmm.
That's not everybody's lifestyle. And then you have all of these cemeteries out there not being maintained. And it's like
Yes.
the person who loves them the most should be taking care of them.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with independent people going out there. And I mean,
Hmm.
we were that when we started for
For sure.
sure.
Hmm.
I mean, but with the big caveat that you do need to get the training at some point. If you're going to start touching the stones, you do need to understand their condition, and
Hmm.
because you could do a lot of harm to them.
Yeah.
Very rarely are you doing more harm than just leaving them be and letting them disintegrate.
Hmm.
But there are things I've seen that you're like, oh no, that gravestone was better off just on the ground. Like, you
Yeah.
see people putting pins and metal contraptions through them and using all kinds of weird epoxies that can't breathe. And, um, I just,
Yeah.
sometimes you're better off not doing things. But
So where does the training come from? Is it just like resources online that you're recommending or would recommend?
my recommendation is always going to be to apprentice with people who, I like any trade, it can be passed down.
Hmm.
And as long as you stay on top of what science is saying, our conservation industry isn't as old as, say, Europe's.
Hmm. Mm.
So I often, if I'm looking for how is our field changing, are there products and materials that I want to look forward to? Because there are some problematic materials that we use that I'm like, I think there could be something better one day. And I
Hmm.
really hope there is. And so when I'm looking for that scientific information, I'm actually looking at what's going on in Europe because their
Interesting.
industry is much older, and they do a lot more studying with art conservation and the like than we do here in the state.
That makes a lot of sense to me because, when I see these folks doing these videos, usually the stone looks a lot cleaner and better than it did when they first started. But I'm thinking like, all these cleaners and everything that you're using that are going into the ground, can they actually be good for it? Where do you start? Like, because like you said, if you're a person who enjoys visiting cemeteries and you see one in, in your community or your town, you go by every day and you want to help out, like, should I get out there with my Windex or
You should definitely get out there with your Windex and just see how people interact with you.
Just see what happens.
Definitely post those videos.
Oh no.
And see if you're still standing the next day.
All right, so we won't do that.
I would say if you don't have enough money to buy something like D2, which is a quaternary ammonium solution, you're looking for things that are non-ionic, which means you don't want things to have salts in them. So that eliminates.
That's a good start.
Dish soap. That eliminates.
Yep.
Just a whole lot of things that say sodium or things that say chlorine or things that say, because what you're going to do if you're going to introduce salts into a porous stone, is those salts are at some point going to start crystallizing.
Yep.
In the stone, and they're going to break it apart. Right. So then the other thing you want to look out for is something that's close to pH neutral. Not even D2, not even Revive. None of them are at a 7. They're not
interesting
neutral, but they're close to neutral. You want to eliminate these things that have strong acids, strong bases. You wouldn't want to go out there with like Comet or anything like that.
Yeah.
So you're left with a very small window of things you can use. So if you are addicted to suds, like some of these videos that people send me that are like, please comment on what this woman is doing. The satisfying part of those videos is that this person's making them super sudsy.
Yep.
Right? That's part of it. If you want something to be sudsy, and don't go for super sudsy, but if you're looking for something that has a little suds to it, Orvis paste, which is a horse cleaner.
Never heard of that.
Yeah, people use it to clean vegetable dyed quilts. It's very gentle, but very, very sudsy. Yeah. And non-ionic.
Interesting.
Yeah. So people used to use all kinds of
So there are a lot of good choices, just probably not in our cabinets right now. If this is not your jam.
And I know people want to just go to the Home Depot and get it done. And they're just,
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so recognizing that my Windex is not the way to go. If you visit a cemetery and it's really in like disrepair and it's really poorly kept, and I want to tell somebody to try and get it some help, what resources can I use? Like, who do you speak to?
So I actually have on my blog, my Epoch Preservation blog, an article I made. It was kind of because of our own grassroots effort in Gloucester. This is kind of how we did things when we found a burying ground that had no one really caring for it. And it's called something like, Do You Want to Save a Graveyard? And it's like 10 first things you can do to get the word out about your cemetery, find out who the owner is and start raising. Sometimes, unfortunately, you have to raise a ruckus. You have to talk to the press. So you have to do Facebook posts. Sometimes that's what you have to do. And the catch-22 of the raising a ruckus is that you are both wanting to get permission from a town or city to do this work, but you're also pissing them off. Yeah. Because you're telling them that they're not doing their job.
Yeah. So you're muscling your way in a little bit. That's going to
oftentimes what happens. Oh no, you have to kind of you're not the bad guy. Like that's the other thing is these people are going to make you feel like you're the bad guy when you're actually have a heart of gold. But one of the, examples I can give is like Gloucester. Gloucester just had to be almost shamed to take care of the burying grounds. And I don't think they would ever hire me. I don't think that because I had to be the person to be like, no, you can't just let people die back there. You can't just let, you can't just let anything happen. So
because it's disgraceful. So, but that's an excellent resource that you have that on your blog. So we'll definitely link that up for folks. So I have to ask, have you ever seen anything spooky or had anything weird happen?
Yeah, all the time. I wouldn't attribute it to the paranormal. I would attribute it to tourism. Yeah, I mean, the list is endless. I worked in the Salem, Massachusetts cemeteries for 2 years. The only spooky thing about them were some of the visitors.
Yeah, the living are scarier than the dead. I agree
They're
with you
way
there.
scarier than the dead. The dead are pretty quiet. I would
Yeah.
like to think that they're not hanging out at the cemetery.
I say the same thing. Like, why, if I get to be a ghost, why would I choose to haunt somewhere I'm buried? I'm going somewhere
Unless you're me,
cooler.
I'm sure I'll die in haunted cemetery.
I mean, just for fun, why not?
I'll just monitor my repairs after I'm
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like paranormal stuff, though, I never want to insinuate that somebody's loved one isn't at rest at all.
Right.
So I love a ghost story as long as it's about fictitious people. I
Mm-hmm.
have like a real thing listening to some of the tour guides in Salem being like, and the ghost of this person who was very much a real person is still wandering around. And it's like, oh, that's not nice.
Yeah,
Like,
they're very sensationalized. I've noticed that too, which is kind of, as we were saying at the top, before I started recording, I think like one of the reasons that I started the podcast to like get the true story, right? Behind like,
yeah, make up a story, the headless horseman, like make up something. Like, you know, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been through like you walked through an old house,
hmm
like maybe taken a house tour or something of an old house, and you're going into all the different rooms and they all have like a different feeling about them. One feels
hmm
like well appointed and you can tell it's like on the first floor, lots of parties were probably held here, it just has like a really warm feeling. And then there's just always one room that you're like, I wonder if this is where they funeralized everybody, or if this is like where everybody spent their last hours. Was this like
Yeah.
someone's deathbed? Because it just has a
Yeah.
feeling about it. Like before I worked in cemeteries, I worked in historic houses,
hmm
and every single historic house just has this room, or maybe it's the attic, or maybe it's the basement. And for people like me who don't go around seeing ghosts, I mean, I have doesn't like see a veiled lady
You just
walking
catch a
around.
vibe. Like,
I
yeah,
still feel things. I still feel
for
like,
sure.
oh, this area in the back of the cemetery isn't visited enough. Like there's not I believe
Interesting.
that people sort of imprint
hmm
their spirit onto things. And I'm talking about the living. I think
hmm
when you go and visit a place, you can tell if it was a place where a lot of beautiful things happened versus a place where a lot of sad things happened.
Yeah.
So it's like that in a burying ground. It's like that in any historic site, any house that
Yeah,
you're like,
I
ooh,
know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, I've been in cemeteries. There was one particular by me. There was one spot like kind of down in the back, and it just felt like a vibe that didn't was like an unfriendly, right? So I'm like, well, I'm gonna definitely go over there. And when I got over there, the only graves in that corner were ones that they also had a plaque that said that they had been completely like moved from another location, like a town
oh, okay.
over, right? So I was like, oh, well, I don't know if there's an unhappiness around that or it's just different. It's like, oh, this all was somewhere else and now it's here and that's confusing. So,
But we changed that vibe,
that's
like
interesting.
through my work, through our work of repairing gravestones, the feel of the cemetery isn't the same when we leave as when we get there, right? So
Yes.
just
Yeah.
the constant visiting every day, sitting there listening to whatever soundtrack Badly Drawn Boys might go to,
hmm
just listening to the music, having laughter, eating lunch,
Yep.
while repairing gravestones is enough life to really change the vibe of a place. And I think that people notice it. Like there are people who are like, I've been living next to this cemetery my entire life, and you guys came in and transformed it. And it's like, yeah, we transformed the gravestones. They're now all upright, but we also brought a lot of love and a lot of joy and a lot of adventure. And we've brought people along on social media. So they're also just remotely bringing all of those feelings to
hmm
that project, and it
Yeah.
transforms it for the community.
hmm
And it's
It's
not the same place.
it's both like a physical transformation, but also like energetically, right? So even just
Oh,
like the land
absolutely.
likes you being there, you know?
Yeah, and we're
So
giving people permission to love the place again. Like some people pass cemeteries and they're like, this is so spooky. But after following my Instagram for a year, they're like, oh my God, look at the caterpillar. Oh, I just saw a butterfly. Look at that script. Isn't that funny how they don't use that word anymore? Or,
yeah.
it's you're giving permission to people who are a little death phobic, a little. We're
hmm
becoming less death phobic, right? But you're giving permission to those
hmm
people who are death phobic to take down their guard and be like, this actually is quite
For sure.
beautiful. And
Yeah, because that was how I know Victorians specifically viewed their cemeteries, more like parks. They would go there and have picnics on the weekend. I do kind of feel, do you feel the same that we are kind of shifting back towards that a little bit, or is that just like the circles I run in?
no, I mean, there definitely are people who are like, are you serious about the cemetery stuff? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
There are some people who
yeah.
don't get it. And I wasn't like I wasn't somebody who grew up loving cemeteries. It is something that I developed a love for because I saw how neglected they were.
Hmm.
So I do kind of understand some of those feelings of let's not think about, I don't want to think about death. I want to live my life, live.
Hmm.
I get it. I mean, memento vivere as much as memento mori, right? Like,
Hmm.
but I mean, every corner is a memento mori these days. There's just so much death
Yeah.
around us. And you know what's interesting? I read an article that was like, we're acting like there's so much more death than there's ever been. But
Hmm.
actually, no, we're not in the middle of, for us, I'm not talking about the world at large. I'm talking about like soldiers on World War II. I mean, we in the United States had large eras of mass casualty of our citizens that were far greater than the things that are going in the world. I mean, COVID destroyed a lot of people, including my own mother.
Hmm.
But,
I'm
you
sorry.
know, I know I say that so flippantly, but it's been 4 years. She was one of the first people in Massachusetts to pass. So
Oh, yeah.
it's been enough time for me to grieve and process it.
Yeah.
But it's really a lot of our belief that there's just so much death around us hasn't as much to do with the death as it does to our connectivity and our ability to communicate the deaths to
Hmm.
one another. Like I would imagine back in puritanical America, you didn't have social media and you weren't like Matthew Perry died and the whole world knows it.
Right.
Or like one week where four people died, but it felt like 1,000 deaths because they were so important. Like it
Yeah.
probably wasn't that quite
Everyone's like,
that
what's happening
communicated.
this week? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you have four people die in the same week, you feel like that was like
Right.
a
Hmm.
mass exodus of celebrities.
I've posted about and researched about like funeral customs and that sort of thing, and like the mourning dress and having your house in mourning and everything, and how long different family members are supposed to stay in mourning for. But the thing is that people died so often that you could spend a really large part of your life just in mourning. If like it takes you a year, 6 months, but life goes on as well. They had their rules of what you should and shouldn't do. Yeah, it was just like a really close part of their day to day, which is
Yeah, it's a
interesting.
beautiful idea. The whole like we're now wearing black, now we're wearing lavender, now we're wearing, yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, 90% of the people in my life are dressed for the depths of mourning. Like, they're all my Salem girlies are all walking around like
Yes, yeah, I've been
it's a
there.
fresh
It's
wound.
my favorite color as well.
Me too.
Makes
I am sort of getting into the lavenders and
Nice. Yeah, it makes shopping easier for sure. I mean,
it's
that's
like
why I
it's
do
a
it.
different
But
level of sadness.
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, if you were in the Victorian era and you had someone like very close to you die, that was like your at least 6 months in your immediate family, you were going to wear your morning dress. And then, okay,
Yeah.
you could come out and wear morning dress in like the lavender and the light grays or something. But then, oops, Aunt Susie died, and now you got to go back to wearing, the
You know
darker
what
colors
I'm a
for her.
big fan of, Kim, is armbands.
Well, the men got to wear the armbands, right?
Well, I did after my mom died, I wore an armband just because it was
Oh,
like
that is lovely.
it was one of those things that like, you know, not everybody knew people who were dying of this
Hmm.
disease. And I just wanted to indicate that if I seem off,
Yeah.
it's because I might be going through something that I don't feel comfortable talking about.
Yes.
And I don't feel comfortable talking about it because I don't want to get bullied by people who are like, it's a house. You know what I mean? Right? Like
Yes.
there was a lot
Yeah.
of that where you're like, just don't talk about the fact that you just lost the most important person in your life. So I would love to bring back sort of just visual cues for people to just say,
Right.
cut that person some slack
Yes.
because there are people every day you're walking by who are freshly grieving and you don't know why they're being
You have
short
no
with
idea,
you.
right? Mm-hmm.
And,
I
you know,
100% agree. And I think, with all the Victorian mourning and funeral rituals, they could not express their feelings, right? They had to keep everything very internal, but they had a very public and like scripted ritual of obvious things to other people to indicate that they were in mourning, and then someone would react to them as appropriate. So yeah, I think that's actually, a lovely tradition that,
yeah,
yeah, would be
don't hit
make a
on
lot of
me.
sense.
My dog just died is like the
Yes.
perfect.
I know, I know. I know. We all need signs on ourselves, right? Makes things easier. Is there anything else that you want to add on before we wrap up and talk a little bit about where to find more information on you and your business?
Yeah, no, not really. I'm a pretty open book. Like we're getting busier and busier as the years press on. Just as the word gets out that our work is important, that's part of it. But also just as, the conservators who are getting older are starting to die off or
Mm,
just no longer able to do their craft. It's becoming on us. Do you know what I mean? A little bit more at the end because there are so very few of them. So
yeah.
I would always, tell people that in their towns and cities, if this is something that they want to do, I wouldn't call it a dying art because it was never a particularly popular one to begin with, but
Hmm.
but there are ways to go about finding funding and all of that. They shouldn't be discouraged by not knowing things as long as they have the desire to learn them.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think, like with the internet, obviously anybody can find the resources to do it like the proper
I'll be
way,
very
right?
careful. Be
So
very
don't take your shortcuts, I guess, is
yeah.
at the end of the day, the moral of the story. But yeah, I mean, your page will definitely link it up. Did you want to mention where people can find you on social?
Yeah, so I very infrequently check TikTok. So I don't have a large following. I don't post a lot there, but I don't think I would even know how to check my messages on TikTok. So I'm more Instagram, Facebook
Sure.
centered. You can always just email me, epoch preservation at Gmail.
Yeah.
I like a good handwritten note.
Yeah, no, the your posts and everything on Instagram, I mean, I think they're lovely and I think they're really informative and I think it's really important work that you're doing. So there's a marked difference between, the person out there making content with their scrubbing bubbles and I think your content, which I really like. Not
Well,
to,
that's because I'm not making content. Well, occasionally I'm making content, right? Like I'll post reels and
we
stuff
all
that are
are.
like, look at this thing from my community. And it's not cemetery stuff, but I'm rarely making content of cemetery stuff
Yeah.
because we're getting hired to do it. So it's more like, this is the job I'm doing. Here it is. Do you
Yeah.
like it? Less than I'm going to go find something that'll definitely do it for you,
Yeah, but that's a good representation of what getting into this kind of work would be for people who are interested, because I think a lot of people are very interested in it. So thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that with everybody.
yeah, I'm happy to help.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks again for making time for me today. I've loved talking to you.
All right, thanks, Kim.
My friends, I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Rachel from Epoch Preservation. Head on over to Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at A Good Night for a Murder and let me know what you thought of tonight's bonus episode, and also if there are any other guests you think I should reach out to have on. I've included all of the links to Epoch Preservation's socials in the show description, as well as the episode blog on my website at agoodnightforamurder.com. That also includes the link to a really helpful blog post you referenced titled So You Want to Save a Graveyard. Please do give them a follow and help support the important work that they're doing. You can also follow me on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at A Good Night for a Murder. Please rate and review and share with friends. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you again soon.